Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm East Forest. I have a new album, Lovingly, a soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner Volume 3, coming out on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2025. Same day, we'll be doing an album release show in New York City at Sony Hall. I'm recording this in advance, but if you are around and there's tickets available, please come down to the show. It's at eastforest.org/tickets. And I wanted to just tell you a bit more about Lovingly, because this is a very unique record that's been 5 to 6 years in the making, and it's quite unusual. It's 6 hours in length. It's designed to guide ceremonies, and I'm going to get into it. But I do have a couple updates. So the podcast is still not on Spotify. It's been well over 2 months. The update is that Spotify took down the podcast in its entirety, completely banned it from the platform. There's not even like a grayed out remnants that it existed. All 300 episodes, evergreen, gone. All the meditations, and I had a playlist there of all the meditations I've offered on the podcast. I reached out to my distributor. I reached out to Spotify multiple times, and they keep kicking me to this particular like infringement claim email. They're like, these are the only people that can help you. And everyone else is like, yeah, just talk to them or just follow up. And I write them, and of course they're lackadaisical. They don't really write back. They write just one sentence being like, please review the email we sent about the infringement. And I'm like, well, I never got an email, and then another week passes, and they say the same thing. And then I'm like, well, where did you send the email? And then they don't respond. And then eventually I got them to say where they sent the email, and they sent it to some email I've never heard of. Like something has nothing to do with me or the podcast. And apparently they send it to the distributor, which I don't understand, as opposed to just me, the creator. So then I'm talking to the distributor, trying Simplecast, being like, do you guys have an email? And I'm just in between everybody, and no one's doing anything about it. No one's really sending me any information. So, I mean, I still don't technically know why they took it down, nor do I have any recourse to do anything about it through Spotify. I've written them, I don't know, 24 times at this point. It's been a complete waste of time. It's more just makes me mad because, these platforms exist. We create content so that they can exist, right? And when I put on a show that has 300 episodes and I of high quality, if I might say so myself, and that enriches their platform, and I might not be the biggest podcast, but at the time we're in the top 5% of podcasts statistically. I mean, most podcasts don't have a lot of listeners, or they're new shows. I've been around 6 years, and you'd think maybe there'd be a little bit of a like, all right, this isn't a priority account. Let's do what we can to get it back up online. I did a little snooping around on why it might have been taken down. And, one possibility is the nature of the work and what I'm talking about, psychedelics, consciousness, basically counterculture. And this also happened right around when the election changed and everything going on with the tech bros, and a cultural power shift, shall we say. Now, I actually don't personally think that's probably what it is. It just could play a factor in it. There's a shadow banning aspect to a lot of this work. And I try not to go down that rabbit hole thinking like, oh, that's what's happening. But I have been seeing that with things like meta ads, maybe something here. This is a more extreme example. Myself and others, Shane Moss, for instance, who's a psychedelic comedy show that he's been touring around. We talked about this, how it almost goes like from week to week or even day to day sometimes, what's going on with policies and algorithms over at Meta and on the ad side. And look, don't get me wrong. I would not be on social media if it wasn't to use it exactly what it's for. It's an advertising platform for creators. And when you play shows and you're working with promoters, typically speaking, that's most of where the promotion budget goes into meta ads. And tends, it can work as far as getting the word out. Like, how do you let people know that something is happening that in theory they want to go to? And it's as simple as that. Like, how do you let them know? And there aren't as many methods these days. Of course, there's email, actually making posts on social media. There's Bands in Town messaging. There's YouTube community messaging. There's, in theory, there's Google ads, but sometimes people consider YouTube ads, but that's kind of pricey for shows and stuff. Point is, it's sort of like the nature of doing business these days on advertising. And I don't like that. I don't like giving my money to the old Zuck. And I don't even like that. I think these platforms, I've talked about it on the podcast many, many, many times. I'm sure you're sick of it, about the role that I believe social media plays in the tribalism and destructive nature that we're seeing in our consciousness and our attention. It's not the only thing. There's a lot of things. But there is a war on our attention. It's the most valuable thing out there. And that takes up a lot for people in general as social media. And generally speaking, that's not doing a lot of good for us. So it's not something that, I'm torn because I also, these aren't platforms that I personally use to scroll through. I haven't scrolled through any of the feeds on the platforms in many years. And not because I'm special, but because I'm actually not special in that I can't handle it. Like, I've never been able. Well, I used to way back do it, but it just didn't make me feel good. And so I had to make those limits for myself, being like, I just can't, I'm too sensitive to look at this whole filtered world that is on social media. And I have to be on the platform on my own page, post and be a part of that. And even that's feels like by far more than enough. I'll see people's profiles because it's we need a link to this or that. That's different than seeing the infinite feed. And I see infinite feeds elsewhere, like in news or otherwise. And so anyway, social media is a beast where maybe there's been some of that shadow banning. I'm trying to get back to the Spotify issue in question. I don't fully know what's going on, but I was doing a little research and it looked like in late October, they kind of made some kind of change in their copyright infringement policy or something like this. And I'm sure basically they've got some AI scrubbing through all of their shows. There's no human hand involved here. And they're looking for what they think is copyrighted content. So music. I share a lot of music on the podcast, as you know, but it's all mine. Or if it's not mine, I get the artist's permission because they're a guest on the show. And I say, can I feature some of your song or a portion of it at the end? And as you know, I put a song at the end of every podcast as a way of making the podcast more enriching. And in late November, I released a podcast that was sharing a live set I played in Denver. And I think I spoke at the beginning of that probably for 20 minutes or something. So there's plenty of talking on it. But it's possible that late November podcast triggered something because the podcast was down 2 days later. And from my point of view, with no notice. I had no email. I had no nothing. It was just gone on Spotify. Spotify's not the biggest podcast audience, but it's growing. Apple's been the big player there. It used to be 95% Apple, and now it's more like 60-some percent. So it was significant. We dropped our numbers of listenership by a third to half, which is a lot, and a bummer. You're just not reaching those people. Maybe they think you just deleted the show or something. I mean, how would they know otherwise? And so let's say there was some issue with the music being on it, and I feel like we could rectify this. One, I own it, or I could take that episode down. Anyway, I'm sorry, this has gone on a long time. I'm just trying to say, I haven't been able to figure it out because they won't write me back. They won't send this email that we're supposed to use to appeal, and so we have no way to appeal. And theoretically, I don't even know what we're appealing. Spotify for Creators, or Creators for Spotify, that is the arm of their podcasting. That's the branded thing that's handling the podcast. It's completely separate from the music side. So it's just a bummer because I want to reach you guys. And it's coming at a time when, I've been questioning how to proceed with the podcast. And that's mostly like about how to meet the moment and how many hours there are in the day. I'm definitely not giving up on it, but I'm just trying to figure out how I want to be relevant and not just be creating noise. I didn't think we created noise in the past, but I've noticed, I don't know, things have just been shifting. I feel like a lot of us are feeling like, how do we arrive to this where we're at? And I think it takes time to understand where this thing is we are, because it's so destabilizing that it's not, you can't just meet the moment. You don't even quite know what the moment is, or the moment itself is still forming. And in that way, I'm trying to give myself some space and some time to allow that to form and to emerge. So that's what's going on with some distribution. That's what sometimes it's like on the back end as a creator. I just want to be creating, and yet we're working on things like this. But that's how it goes. That's how it goes. Lovingly. That's why I'm not going to be sharing music on the podcast today or in the near future until I can figure this out. I'm not going to create more problems. I've been sharing most music in most like live sets and demos, or anytime I have like things I can't release elsewhere. It's all on the Patreon. And you can join Patreon to see if you like it for free. Patreon.com/East Forest. We call it the Council. We still do the monthly council over there. It's awesome. That's really the best place for me to share music, because there I can share whatever I want, and it's all cool. There's no issues, and I share a lot of music over there that I can't share anywhere else. And I had shared that live set from Denver over there too beforehand. I was just trying to spread the love end of the year over here on the pod. But I would like to do more meditations. I even considered making this podcast, diving more into the meditations, doing some solo casts, and then doing some interviews. But I can't do that really effectively if I can't include any music. Because, music's a big part of my meditations and my ethos about, it's a major tool. So I did distribute the podcast all over on YouTube. And so that's an option for you too. And that, I think, went retroactively back all 300 episodes. But the Lovingly album that I've just released, I'm very excited to get this out into the world, mostly because it's been a long road. It's all the music in it was recorded and improvised inside ceremonies. Most of these are essentially psilocybin ceremonies. Some of these were private, some of these were in Costa Rica, some were at Esalen, some were at other places, some were live streamed. But they're all where there's a live witness, so to speak, usually a group of people, a small group of people. And we're in that space if anything is available to us, which is a magical space and a challenging space. To be quite frank, it's a scary space, but that means you've really opened the door. And you're really surfing, you're really flying, and you're working with, you got to give something over there. I think we're always doing that, man, in these spaces. You really are. And it takes a lot of trust for everybody, but for my part, for sure. And I've played a variety of ceremonies, and these ceremonies, I have to prepare for them in a particular way that's relatively arduous. Not just the amount of rehearsal, but in how I have to prepare myself physically, a renunciation of alcohol before. I mean, I currently haven't been drinking for quite a while, but, it's a dieta that you put yourself through to prepare yourself to be that sort of antenna and try to refine the antenna, what you're inputting into your body physically, but also energetically. And so you don't do a lot of things. And that's a big part of my life, especially when running up to these things or trying to get ready. And then, of course, there's just the nerves and organizing it and helping curate people through it and making sure it's the right people there and all these sort of things. There's different levels to that depending on the event, but it's literally extraordinary than what is perhaps typical. And even regular concerts, it's a lot, but this is something else. And then there's the long form nature of it. So I tend to record, I try to record most. I just have a little digital 32-bit recorder that's connected to the direct outs of my system. So the keyboard, basically what's going out to the front of house is also going to this recorder, and it's just a stereo recording, straight out, raw of what's going down. And then I take that and I try to listen to it, and then if I hear moments in there where sometimes it feels like I found something particularly special that we were going through musically or energetically, I file it away in a way. You're like, and I try to find the biggest sections that I can find, and I just sort of would hold on to those. And, this is the third time I've made a record like this. The first was Music for Mushrooms in 2019. That's 5 hours. It's the first in my series called The Soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner. And then the second was called In, which ended up being 2 hours. And that one I wasn't so strict in any way on how long it would be. I just kept cutting it and cutting it and cutting it until it felt like it was ready or where it wanted to be. So that was 2 hours. And now this one, Lovingly, Volume 3. And it's 6 hours, 15 minutes to be exact. And there are some cut downs. Like technically, a lot of the songs on the official documentary soundtrack are edits from Lovingly. Not all of them, but some of them. In the same way that the Spores album are edits from the Music for Mushrooms album. So the Spores album is a 1 hour version of Music for Mushrooms. The official documentary soundtrack is essentially a 1 hour version with some other songs on there of Lovingly. So Lovingly's 21 songs. And I thought when I was first putting this together, it did feel like after the Titanic record, Music for the Deck of the Titanic, I knew I was working on this Lovingly album. I didn't have the title yet, but it's something I've been kind of gathering songs for a long time. I knew I wanted to put out a long form journey guidance music record. One, to share where the work is at, like what's been coming up in these ceremonies. And another, because it's like, it's like the answer to the question of the movie. And the movie's talking, Music for Mushrooms, it's talking about, is music relevant and ceremony relevant? Is nature relevant? How are these things, when you put them together, to meet this moment we're in as a people? And it's like this ultimate question. And it's also saying like what kind of music, and at the end of the day, the answers come from your own direct experience and direct experiences. So this record, in a way, is the answer by you experiencing yourself in it. By you working with it, you create your own answer to these questions. So I felt it was just important that if we're going to be talking and exploring this subject, that I offered a solution in a sense, or a particular tool set. And that was the same thing with the Music for Mushrooms record in 2018. I ultimately put that out because things like the Johns Hopkins studies were just starting to come out and go on, and there was the playlist that they were using, and I was not satisfied with those playlists, and I was seeing the work that we were doing with music in our own private circles, and I thought, well, instead of just complaining about it, let's offer an alternative and just leave it at that. Just put it out and see what people think. At the time, I was not aware of any other albums of that length that were on Spotify and streaming platforms, and I didn't even know if you could release something that long. So ultimately, I just distributed it, I think at the time it was through CD Baby, and waited to see what happened. and it eventually came out, and the rest is history. But since then, there have been other long-form albums as well. There's like a Mac DeMarco one. Of course, there's Max Richter's Sleep, amazing masterpiece, that 8-hour record, among a few others. But putting together, so going back, I take those stereo tracks, which means just like a song. It's not stemmed out where I can mix the music. Like I can't raise the vocal or decrease the bass except for using tools like EQ. And I essentially curate that into a track order over time and start to build out like this ceremony from other ceremonies. And again, I try to take the largest chunks I can that I really like, and I try to have them be in the placement from when they emerged in the ceremony, roughly, like if it was the first song or the middle song or near the end, because there's an arc to the experience, of course. And then from there, you have to test it. And this is when things take a long time because it's a long record. Especially when you're really starting out, you've got a lot of songs and a lot of options. And you have hunches like, I think this one or I think that one. And it takes a long time to test out the music in the medicine plant space, or having Radha test it out at the ketamine clinic she works at, the Boise Ketamine Clinic, or sharing it with friends and getting their feedback, and then even realizing like that's just a data point. I mean, even for myself, it's a filter that it's going through. And I would have times, I had this spreadsheet to try to keep track of this, where I would take notes on the songs. And I had one that, for instance, I did it, I think it was a ketamine journey to it. And that's a shorter medicine, so I only was able to listen to like 2-3 hours. And there was one song that I was really jamming on. And I remember like going back to write notes down. That was like, this song is amazing. Like, I should end the entire record with it. It just felt so tapped in. That's what I want to put into my spreadsheet. And I opened up the spreadsheet, and the notes on that song said something like, pass, not that interesting, derivative, like the very opposite polarity of my excitement in the moment. So when you have moments like that, of my own contradictions, you kind of have to just keep going at it and saying, well, let's get more data points, which is going to take more time. So after you go through all that and you start to hone in on something, then I have to go through it's light editing, where I try to edit as little as possible. But there will be times where maybe an intro, something was really dragging longer than in the moment, that I could trim down by like 8 bars, or a little thing here or there you want to cut out. So then you do that, and then you got to mix it. And when you're mixing it, I can't really mix it, so you're sort of mastering it, but you're mastering it, trying to sort of course, there'll be things like, oh, I was playing a particular instrument, like a harp, mellotron harp sound in this, and it was too loud. Like, it worked in the room, but it's too loud in the recording. It's really poking through. And so you're using various forms of dynamic EQ or otherwise, or compression, to kind of push it down and seeing if that works, and then trying it on different systems and seeing, like, does that work? Because, look, ultimately, this music has to not pull you out of the experience. Of course, you want it to pull you into the experience and guide you. And there's a particular sonic balance that needs to occur, where we're pushing edges, like sort of like a balloon inflating and deflating, or waves that come and go. We want to find those edges and even crest them at times, but through a continuous listening period, where the hope is that when you start it and you set the volume, you don't have to touch it again. Like, you're good. You can fully trust and drop into the spirit experience and not have to adjust as you go. And within that, it's dynamic, meaning there's highs and there's lows, there's tension and there's release. This is a critical part of journey music itself, and also just for it to be engaging for the human ear over that kind of time. We need a diversity of sound and volumes and tonalities and timbres and rhythms and all sorts of things like that. So once I do all that, I more testing, and eventually you start to hone in on something that feels like it could be it, and that can be almost the hardest time, because that's when things can get really confusing, because it starts to get very familiar. And this is true, I think, with all artistic work, whether you're writing a book or you're making a typical album, and I'm familiar with it there, where you just get too close to the material, or making music for Mushrooms Film. It's hard to have that objective distance. Psychedelics can give you that objective distance. It's just a particular kind of distance where, journeying to the entire thing, it's only so many times you can really even do that, enough to have the time in your own life, so to speak. So I'm just excited for you all to hear it and for it to be out in the world, because it's been quite exhausting to get it to this point. Even keeping track of, like, when we're mastering it. Like actually master it with a mastering engineer, which is Taylor Dupree, 12K mastering. Keeping track of all the different files. Like, wait a minute, was this the one, like 6 months ago you gave me where you changed the high-end EQ, and I want to make sure I'm listening to the right one. And he'll be like, wait a minute, it's a logistical nightmare at times. And to make it even crazier, we did one more layer after I finished the record, which was to do the Atmos mastering with Stephen Camo, which is so it can work on Atmos systems through Apple Music or Amazon or Tidal. I'm not even going to get into the Atmos thing. I'll talk to you about that another time. Most of you are probably like, who cares? What are you talking about? Your eyes are glazing over as soon as I said the word Atmos. I feel you. But we did all these things. And when it's 6 hours of material, Taylor Dupree is someone that he's mastered my other ceremony music records, as well as a few other records of mine. Really brilliant musician, worth checking out on his own too. But I knew he would do it without complaining, and I knew he could handle like the long form stuff because he's done it before, and he's just cool like that. And he did. It definitely we got confused at times, but not for lack of not trying, just because it was confusing. I mean, on top of that, I had to master a bunch of this before it was done because they were music cues in the Music for Mushrooms film. Right? So we had to finish certain songs so that I could use them in the film. And then I had other like film songs that were just in the film, and he's doing all of it and trying to keep track. Like, wait a minute, you've got this long form Lovingly album. You've got the film soundtrack. You've got film cues only. And then you've got these edit tracks, and we're doing it all at once. So it's like, 50 songs or more. I don't even know. And many, many, many hours of material. And he did it all. Amazingly. So, in theory, we got all that right. I sure damn hope, and uploaded the right things to the right places, and it seems to be ingesting and coming out now as you're listening to this on February 14th of the year 2025. The album is digitally released, Lovingly, a soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner, Volume 3. The only merch item will not be on vinyl because it's so long. We're going to have, and we have, they should be up now if you go to the store at eastforest.org. It's a flash drive. And I put on that the high resolution audio files, not just the individual wave files, but also there's a continuous high res file if you want to just like, it's not even individual tracks, like it's all just one track. But I put all the ceremony albums up there. So Music for Mushrooms in, Lovingly, Spores, official documentary soundtrack, plus some articles and writings I've done on this subject. It's all on that one thumb drive. So if you want the best fidelity, there you go. And you want it for like offline use, which is, I think, quite helpful when you do journeys like this. You don't want any interruptions. You want to rely on streaming, or you certainly wouldn't want an ad coming in. So having that offline use can be just wonderful peace of mind. Set it, forget it, hit play. You're good to go. That is my vision for this music and this work. That I think we need all the tools we can get to meet this moment, and we need change. And I believe change comes from the inside out. Not just the top down. A lot of us are waiting for these top down changes. And that's not really how it happens. It happens from the individual outward, from the soul. So we got to do soul work. We have to create the space so that we can be spoken to and we can get in touch with our own inner voice, our own inner wisdom, find our North Stars. So I created the Lovingly Challenge, and that was this idea of like, hey, I'm just challenging you to sit with yourself in this music. Maybe not the whole 6 hours. I mean, that'd be great. Go for it. But even a little bit, just to intentionally listen to one thing at a time. It's a radical act these days. It really is. I mean, that is counterculture, straight up. So that is needed. And you're needed. You're fucking needed right now. We need everyone to, get on board with their own lives and recognize, what do you want to do? Like, what choices are you going to make here? And not that everyone needs to be this like revolutionary, vigilante, but in a sense you are by being who you are, by getting on your own path. I can trust in that, in sort of a larger education of the individual souls out there. And not everyone can go down to a fancy retreat and go overseas. Like I'm recording this early because we're going to be down in Reunion in Costa Rica on a psilocybin retreat. And that's amazing, and the support people have is amazing, but it's not accessible for everyone. And it's only 35 people when we're down there. If someone has the right mindset and it's safe for them, and they figured out that it's right for them, and they have the right support. Maybe they have a friend or a sitter and they want to do a journey in the way that's good for them. The music is enough to be the guide. It's like 95%, in my opinion, to fill in the rest of that picture. And so that's an accessible tool that can spread around the planet. Now, like for instance, this album being released, it's now out there for theoretically many, many millions of people to just hit play on and try in the way and the methodology and through the practice that feels right to you. Whether it's not about psychedelics, maybe that's right for you. And yes, this was recorded with psilocybin ceremonies, but it works wonderfully with just your consciousness and your attention. As much of your attention as you give to it, it's going to give back to you. It'll take you to all the realms of your soul if you sort of give it the keys of your attention, saying, I'm here with you right now and I'm listening. And then just have patience. All you have to do is breathe and listen. But that's what the lovingly challenge, so to speak, is. It's a lovingly invitation. And it's called lovingly because when I was doing those testings and I was listening to the music, that name came to me a couple years ago. I wasn't sure it would stick, but it did. It just felt like that is ultimately the energy of the universe, of this womb that we're in, this fractal unfolding that we can't fall out of, the fragments we are of the great oversoul. That is a lovingly energy. It's maternal in that sense to me. Like we come from something, we are something, and it's blossoming forward endlessly in a way that is lovingly. And that is also a beautiful energy, adjective, verb to live into, like an approach. If we're looking for like, what can I bring in this moment? For me, the idea of lovingly was it. That answers a lot of questions and keep things simple. It's almost like an intention I can bring into my day-to-day life. That's just one word that seemed to sum up a lot of things for me. So, send me my questions if you have any more, or I definitely would love to hear about your experiences with the record. Again, be safe, do what's right for you. I'm not advocating you have to take psychedelics to this by any means, but I just want to hear about your experiences and what you think of the music and what you think of the listening. There's so much there, so much music, and there's some pretty cool moments that came up over the years. And I definitely get very into making them sound as good as I possibly can in ways that maybe, it's like the last 5% of like the sonic experience. For instance, you mix it all down, you get it all done, it's all sequenced, and then and it's all good to go. And then like, well, now I'm still going to run it through all my analog equipment in real time. And then you do all of that, and then you have to listen to that, and then we master that, and then you have to listen to all that, and then we do the Atmos mixes, and you listen to all that. And, you find things at times, and you have to go back and go start over again, fix it, and listen again. So we worked really hard on the sonic quality. So give yourself if you can, if you want to, the best listening environment because there's a lot of detail in there and a lot of spectrum of frequencies that are just juicy and wonderful. And I want you to experience it and feel them. You have to remember that sound is a pressure wave. So if you set up speakers and it's a nice system and it's coming through it, there's enough wattage or energy behind it, it's pushing air in the room that's touching your body, and it's a physical process sound. And that's what it feels like when you feel bass in a nice bass system, like at a live show. But all the frequencies are like that. Headphones are just doing it on a little micro level straight into your ear, but it's pretty cool when you can kind of have a beautiful balanced system to kind of hear like how I heard it coming out of the studio monitors here, or how I heard it in the moment in my little in-ear monitors when it was being born. You know, we're listening to music being born, and hopefully that's a song that we're all part of and that you can join in on. So thank you for listening. Thank you to everyone on our Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest. Thanks for coming to the shows if you're in New York. And there's going to be a few other shows are going on too. Treefort at Boise. We'll be back at the Ram Dass retreat in August in North Carolina. And some others are being announced, and probably a lot more touring going on in the fall is probably the case. So stay tuned, get on the email list, and thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to this solo cast. And until then, keep walking, friends.